13th. May we have roll call, please, for the City Council?
Sure. Council members Friedman?
Here.
Garpetian?
Here.
Najarian?
Here.
Sinanian?
Here.
And Mayor Devine?
Here. And for the Housing Authority, please?
Authority members Devine?
Here.
Friedman?
Still here.
Garpetian?
Here.
Kelly?
Here.
Najarian?
Here.
Karazian?
Here.
And Chair Sinanian.
Here.
And what is our first item, please?
The agenda for September 13, 2016 joint public meeting of Glendale Council and Housing Authority was posted on Friday, September 29th on the bulletin board outside City Hall. Item 1 is the sequel item. I believe this item was moved to the following date.
Mr. Ochoa?
Yes, ma'am. Regrettably, the actual documents, the CEQA guidelines, were omitted from the online and written agenda packet. So you have the ordinance, the reso, but the guidelines aren't there. So we are asking that you pull this for today so that you can give a full week's notice and everyone has the information. You had requested, Madam Mayor, that we put this on the evening agenda. So what we would do with the Council and Housing Authority Board's blessing is have next week have a special meeting of the Housing Authority Board alongside the City Council, similar to what we did a couple of weeks ago on the rent issue, the rent affordability. So we would have, presuming our Housing Authority Board members can do it, we would have the Housing Authority and joint City Council meeting next Tuesday evening at 6 o'clock.
Okay, fine.
Review
Thank
that,
you.
Madam.
Do I have my colleagues
I
agree?
think that's a great idea. We should have it in the evening to make sure that as many people show up and voice their concerns as possible.
Exactly, and that's precisely why I asked for that. So thank you very much, Mr. Ochoa.
Madam Mayor, we have
yes.
2 cards, so
On
should
that
keep it for
item?
next week. That's correct.
Would you like to speak today, or would you rather wait until today? Okay.
Well, then
Can they
read. They
how
can,
what's
but then you
the,
have to read the item to the
protocol?
record, which I don't think he's done.
Oh,
So it's up to you.
yeah. Well, let's just move the hearing to next week, and then you can speak next week? Are you shaking your head no?
Okay, I mean, all here today.
Okay, well, let's go ahead, and they are here today, so let's go ahead and let
I
them.
think if we need to come back next week, we'll have to come back next week.
Okay, all right.
We're very concerned citizens.
I may
Please read
that
the item
record.
into the record, please.
Sure. We have at item 1, Director of Community Development, regarding updates to the City of Glendale and Glendale Housing Authority procedures for implementation of the California Environmental Quality Act of 1970 as amended and state CEQA guidelines as amended, and updates to the Glendale Municipal Code related thereto. At item 1A, we have ordinance for introduction amending the Glendale Municipal Code. At 1B, we have City Council resolution to adopt the City of Glendale and Glendale Housing Authority guidelines for implementation, the California Environmental Quality Act as amended, and state CEQA guidelines as amended. And 1C, Housing Authority resolution to adopt the City of Glendale and Glendale Housing Authority guidelines for implementation of the California Environmental Quality Act as amended, and state CEQA guidelines as amended.
Okay, thank you. Thank you. So let's take Mark Fletcher first, please.
Thank you very much. My name is Mark Fletcher. I'm 62 years old, and I've lived at 711 Prospect Drive all my life. And I'm very concerned about what I've seen happen to the neighborhood over the last 5 years. I can remember when we used to watch the fire department drive up and down Alta Vista and Prospect Drive. I haven't seen that happen in many, many years. The congestion and the housing that's been allowed to be built in the area is really concerning me, because if we get a fire up on Forest Lawn and the fire department needs to come there and they can't get through, do I get to sue the city if my house burns down? Do I? So I'm very concerned about what I see about zoning and what I can see about what's going on today's agenda. And you can bet your life I will be back again to talk about this next time when we consider building more residential units on smaller properties in the area. Thank you very much for your time.
Mr. Fletcher, this item was on the EIR process.
Well, I'm not sure which this is. I just came here to talk about what I talked about.
Okay.
This is my first time in the council meeting.
Okay.
I'm glad to be here, but I'm very concerned about what I see going on. And if I spoke at the wrong time, my apologies.
Okay.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Bill Weissman?
I'll wait until the item's heard.
All right, thank you very much. Then we'll move on to the next item, please.
Sure. At item 2, we have Director of Community Development regarding Community Development Department report on streamlining. We have a 2A, City Council motion to note and file.
Mr. Ochoa, Mr. Lansfame.
I'll have Phil start it off, yeah?
Madam Mayor, members of the City Council, Mr. Chairman, members of the Housing Authority, we wanted to bring to you an update on the streamlining process. On this, remember back in 2013, some of you were on the City Council. We had these goals were represented as reasons for streamlining. One of the more important things that has come about since my tenure with the department is that last bullet, which was not one of the original ones, but rather maintain the quality customer service with fewer human resources. In August, we adopted these in December of 2013. In August of 2014, we had the second round of our retirement incentives where the planning department, which is mostly where this lies, lost about 40% between the two, 40% of the staff. So we're trying to maintain the same service, that same balance, that same quality with fewer people in meeting your directives and those of the city manager. Try and stay under 1,600 people. What feels right. So again, these were our goals, and we went and adopted some streamlined changes. This is the list of those. They're for the most part administrative in nature, smaller projects. There are some things where on the hillsides, elimination of CUPs, we've changed the review on that to design review so that the CUP is being looked at the same time as the design, and all of those things that you take care of in a CUP hearing are being taken care of by the design review. And we've got some examples to go over with you. There was an increase in the administrative exception, allowing 20% reduction in numeric standards from 10 to 20. And then there was some parking exceptions in the downtown. The authority was given to the Director of Community Development, whereas before it was the City Council.
Sure. Quick question. So, if you go back one slide, please. Eliminate hillside CUPs for new single-family homes. Does the process of CUP going to Planning Commission is eliminated and the CUP goes to Design Review Board, or it's eliminated completely and Design Review Board oversees both the design and CUP conditions?
The latter. It would have, the CUPs are heard by a planning hearing officer, not the Planning Commission, planning hearing officer. And what we've done is we've taken that step out and we've charged the Design Review Board, and Roger's going to go into more detail about it, but we've now charged the Design Review Board for those conditions, those things, look at it holistically as part of the design and take care of things like slope, cubic yards that are being removed, where you have less than 80 linear feet. Those are the types of things that we've now taken out of the CUP process, and we've given that jurisdiction to the when we did the streamlining to the Design Review Boards, and they have been able to handle all of those as one item.
So instead of having two hearings, you have only one hearing.
Correct.
And when did we change? Because as far as I remember, the CUPs used to go to Planning Commission. And only the zoning changes or variances would go to hearing officer. When did we change that? Because
I'll let the planning
I don't know, I
staff,
may be
since
wrong,
I'm
but-
still learning to drive the car.
Yeah, I think the CPs always went to the zoning administrator, and then when we eliminated that particular function and went to the planning hearing officer, the CPs never went directly to the planning commission.
Okay.
Except for on appeal.
So I'm going to ask Senior Planner Roger Kiesel to come up, walk through some of the walk through these main changes and streamlining, and then I'll come back and we've got some thoughts on things that we could do in addition based on the performance of these.
All right, thank you. All right. Well, let me go back one second. The first change that we implemented was institution of what we call administrative use permits. Basically, 3 years ago or so, staff looked at all the uses that required conditional use permits and thought, well, these sorts of uses generally generate less public inquiry. They're, smaller type issues or smaller uses. They don't happen very often. So let's think of another way to process them. And that way to process them was an administrative use permit. So certain uses we took out of the requirement to get approval of a conditional use permit, made them administrative use permits. Administrative use permits have the same submission requirements, have the same notification requirements in terms of noticing in the paper, public notices, sign posting requirements. The difference between a CUP application and an AUP application is a CUP requires a public hearing, is heard by a planning hearing officer. The administrative use permit, the AUP, what happens is a draft decision letter is generated by staff, and then a notice is sent out to 500-foot property owners and occupants saying, our draft decision letter is available. You have 10 days to comment on it. And then after that 10th day, we can render a decision. So instead of the public hearing, it's more of an in-house application. If we get public comments in our on AUP applications, we analyze them, and either if we feel it appropriate, we integrate whatever it is into the decision letter. And then issue what we call a final decision letter. And that's similar to the planning hearing officer rendering a decision on a conditional use permit.
Roger, could you just, for the people listening, give an idea of what these types of applications are? So typically we understand.
Sure. Actually, let's do the next slide. We've had 46 AUP applications. The vast majority of them have been alcohol related. So 42 of the 46 are alcohol restaurants, and then the vast majority of those have been restaurants, and you can see the other uses. The 4 non-alcohol related were there was a residential use in the IMUR zone. And let me see.
I'm going to also ask that for the benefit of people listening, that if you're using an acronym for the first time, tell us what it is.
Yes.
Thanks.
What did I say? AUP?
IMUR.
IMUR. Okay. Industrial mixed use residential, which is basically IMUR is industrial mixed use with a residential component.
So in that case, you had someone who wanted to just be residential without the industrial use?
Correct. It was an entirely residential use. And this project was on Doran near the entrance to the 134 freeway. It didn't include any commercial industrial component, and it was an AUP, an administrative use permit.
So it's interesting to note that of those 46 AUP applications, 2 generated public comment. The project that Roger just described was one of them. And I think there were 4 comments that were related to that. One of them was supporting the project itself. The other project that generated some public comment was the Starbucks up in Montrose.
Right.
So of the 46, we had 2 that generated some level. In terms of the Starbucks, it was approved with conditions, and it was appealed by both, and ultimately the Planning Commission said, no, we're not going to allow it. So those are the kind of anecdotes that we'll try and weave in for you so that you get an idea of how this works and what kind of checks and balances there are.
So in this case, of the 42 alcohol-related AUP applications, one of them generated comments. A lot of comments, but comments. Off the top of my head, I can't think of the other 2. I can get that information for you. Okay. So just some general statistics. The 2 years prior to implementation of the streamlining ordinance, there were 65 planning hearing officer hearings. As I mentioned before, conditional use permits were and still are heard by the planning hearing officer. So in the 2 years before streamlining, there were 65 hearing officer meetings, and the average conditional use permit decision took 127 days. Since streamlining, or about in the 2.5 years since streamlining, the number of planning hearing officer hearings has been reduced fairly significantly, down to 40. And introduction of the AUP process, AUPs were typically decided on average in 71 days. And then anything that still required a CUP, there was a slight reduction down to 120 days on average to get that decided upon.
A quick question for you.
Sure.
What makes that difference between 71 days to 120 days? Is it the amount of time that staff has to spend on preparing reports for the hearing, public hearing, or what is the when the application is submitted and is deemed complete, from there on the process between AUP and CUP? Because it's a big difference between 71 to 120. So it's
right.
Almost 50 days, 49 days. So the difference is on what? Is it
the staff reports are typically a little bit less complex to write.
For AUP?
AUPs, for instance, the vast majority were for alcohol. They're easier to write than other types or applications that require CUPs. There's the noticing requirements, the signposting requirements, and the actual scheduling of the hearing. That takes a little bit more time. There's no lag time between when a draft AUP decision letter can be issued, and there is no lag time in an AUP application. There could be, and there typically is with a CP application, because you've got to schedule it for a hearing.
So that's the 30 days, basically.
Well, it's caught up, less than 30 days.
You get caught up in any backlog that the hearing officer would have. So, I'd like to go next week. In an AUP, you can render that decision because you're not bound to cases in front of you.
Yeah.
So that's a lot of what that 50 days is. You're right, it is a long time.
Okay, thank you. Continue.
All right. Any other questions regarding AUPs? Second is we instituted actually what staff calls administrative design reviews. And I have on the slide the types of projects that staff has the ability to do at an ADR level, the administrative design review level. Additions and remodels of single-family houses, new multifamily units of 6 or fewer units, and then 10,000 square feet or less non-residential mixed-use buildings. So, for instance, the new building just south of the Masonic Temple, where Shake Shack and Egg Slut and a couple other restaurants are going. That building was less than 10,000 square feet, and it was approved at an administrative design review process level. So those are the types of projects that staff has the ability to perform at an administrative design review. But if for whatever reason we have some concerns, we can kick that up to the design review board prior to us committing to one way or another.
But this is already in place, right?
Correct. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
I would just note for you, Council and Housing Authority, that they can be referred to the Design Review Board. If they are, it goes through a full Design Review Board, and that decision is made early on, and then the application is for design review. If it does go through an administrative design review, the application is for administrative design review. The fee paid is for administrative design review. We need to carry that process through and render a decision, either for or against the applicant. But we need to give them due process and go through the whole thing. We can't get halfway into it and then say, oh, change my mind, let's kick it up to not the term that has been used, kick it up to the design review board. You need to finish that. And you'll see down at the last bullet, Roger most likely was going to get to it. But the application fee for administrative design review is less, as is the appeal. And the theory behind that was that we want to make it easy if somebody really feels that this isn't the right project, that staff didn't make the right call, it's pretty nominal to appeal it to the design review board. And then you'd go through a normal design review process.
How many of them have been appealed?
None.
None to date. I know we've had one where we haven't yet rendered a decision, and applicant is trying to work with the neighborhood to sort it out. That might be, but we technically have had none appealed.
From the administrative design review.
Right, and the fee is about $520.
You didn't bring any pictures just to show people kind of the type of additions, the type of modifications we're talking about?
I did not.
But you have them. If someone really wanted to see them, you could.
Well, yeah, the files are public, and ADRs, as I'm going to say, administrative design reviews, ADRs have the same submittal requirements. They have the same notification requirements. They really function the same way as DRBs, aside from similar to AUPs. We don't have a public meeting. We don't have a public hearing. And instead, ADRs are processed. We send out 500-foot mailing label or 500-foot notices, but people are notified that there's a draft decision letter.
Let me ask this, and you may not have the answer, but of those projects that you've had in the past 2 years that went through the ADR process, do you know approximately how many objections you've received from neighbors?
We do.
But what happened to those?
That's actually the next slide. So I will just move on there. Oh, wait, maybe it's not the next slide. Sorry.
No, I'm not sure.
It's right here.
There you go.
It's 2 slides from
Yeah. So of the 128 design review applications, 89 have been through the administrative design review process. 24 of them we've had comments, or approximately 27% of those ADR applications. What happens when we get comments is they're acknowledged in the staff report, in the final staff report, and responded to either by, yes, we didn't think of that, we're adding this as a condition, whatever it is, or this isn't really relevant to a DRB decision. So that's how we respond to letters we get for the ADRs.
You have had projects then modified based on
Yes.
comments you've gotten from the public?
We have, yeah.
Roger, if you can go back one slide.
Sure.
Do want to let you know, you hear from a lot of anxious people, when can I get my project approved? Prior to streamlining, 64 DRB meetings, following that, 37 meetings. We reduced that again about 50 days, almost 7 weeks. So if you are waiting for your home to be approved, the ADR can be a tool that we use, given certain circumstances, that allows you to move forward with that. We should also note that because of that drop in the number of meetings, as well as the ability to staff them, we've eliminated one of the DRB board, or one of the design review boards. So now we have one board that twice a month.
What is the wait time right now? If I submit my application tomorrow and it's complete, what's the backlog on the DRB? How soon can you get on DRB? With this system and I want to make sure that everybody knows everything that we talked about so far is part of our ordinance. Am I correct?
Correct. It's
okay, so
an
it's
adopted
nothing new.
ordinance.
These are all in the books already. This is nothing that. This is nothing new that's coming up. So until we get to the next section.
4 months.
The average design review board application took 126 days since streamlining went into effect, in the 2.5 years since streamlining.
26 days?
No, 126 days.
126 days to get to design review board.
No, to render a decision, for the board to render a decision. So it wasn't. To get to design review board was probably 2 weeks earlier than 126, so 110.
When they render a decision, they render a decision at the
hearing.
At the hearing,
Yeah,
so
yeah.
it's 120 days or 110 days, then they have 2 weeks of appeal period, which makes it 124 days basically. Is that what you're?
No, the 126 days doesn't count the appeal period, so it's 14 or 15 days past. It'd be 141 days.
Okay. So you get to the design review board in 126 days and get a decision.
Get a decision, and then there's
4
the
months,
appeal
basically,
period.
right?
Yeah. And the same appeal period exists for ADRs. It's 15 days. Any other questions on administrative design review? Okay. To Ms. Friedman's question, the staff report listed generically about 15 or so of the concerns that people have raised in their letters regarding ADR cases, and some of them are design related and some of them aren't.
So this is the situation we were talking about before with the elimination of CUPs for new single-family homes. Prior or since 1993, prior to streamlining, if the lot width was less than 80 feet, if the current slope exceeded 50%, and or if there were more than 1,500 cubic yards of grading, it required a CUP. The CUP had to be obtained before you went to design review. So even if you could schedule it ahead and picture, okay, I'm going to have my CUP hearing in 3 months, so would you schedule me for design review in 4 months? You still had some time that you were waiting for your CUP. It might have been a month. If you missed that date, you've got to get rescheduled. It could be even longer. We've now asked the DRB to take the authority to review all of those issues as part of the design.
Can I ask, so it used to be then the CUP went in front of Planning Commission, right?
No, the CUP also was heard by a planning hearing officer.
It was in the past. And
Yeah.
then how often were they not given? Because it seemed to me like they were always given.
Well, and actually, I think that's one reason why in the streamlining, if you notice the first lot width less than 80 feet, That's why we just dropped that entirely, because the lot is 80 feet less or more. There's nothing we can do about it. The other two, there is some control in terms of the 15 cubic yards of earth movement. You know, can the house be designed differently so that there is less grading?
I guess my comment was really a question, and you may not know the answer, but prior to that, so let's say 4 years ago, let's say in 2011 or 2010, of the projects that came in for a CUP that required, let's say, 2,000 square feet and up of grading, how many of those were just denied because of that?
I don't have that statistics. I can get that, though.
But the question is really kind of, with this new process, have we allowed a whole bunch of new houses by not having the CUP process that we would have not allowed? And you don't have to answer it if you don't know, but I think someone might ask that later.
I don't.
We could look into it, but my guess is that several were approved with conditions.
Can we? Yeah. Can we let him finish his report, and then we have a lot of cards and ask questions later?
Well, I think I'd kind of like to understand this as they go through, but go ahead.
Okay. All right. So the streamlining transferred the review authority for slope and grading to the DRB. And in your staff report, there's an extensive section on the, I think, 9 or so single-family houses that would have required previously, before streamlining, to go through the CUP process. There's a discussion on each of those houses that I won't get into. But just as a summary, in the last 2.5 years, we've had 25 single-family houses proposed in the hillside zones. 12 of those have been reviewed to date by the Design Review Board, and 9 of those 12 would have required approval of a conditional use permit had they come in 2.5 years ago. And then in the part of the staff report that I just mentioned, there are paragraphs on each of the 9, I believe, houses pretty extensively, so I'm not going to go into that. But staff and the DRB did a nice job identifying the issues and appropriately addressing them when warranted. Time savings up to 3 or 4 months, probably not usually quite that significant, just because there is some overlap time, as Phil was explaining, between the CUP process and the DRB process. Well, let me just go on. Okay, the next set of streamline measures is the administrative exception process. Basically, administrative exceptions are sort of what we call minor variances. They do the same thing as variances, but they're on a less intense minor level. So currently, we've got 14 categories of administrative exceptions, and 3 were changed in the streamlining. The first was we increased maximum deviation that was allowed for development standards from 10% to 20%. That was the first one. The second one allowed the deviations to include parking space dimensions. Previously, you could not deviate from that without a variance. And then we also added a section on if someone wanted to increase the number of parking spaces in a surface parking lot, parking structure, but that parking structure was non-conforming as to parking space dimensions or driveway width, they couldn't do that without a variance. That the streamlining ordinance brought that in as an administrative exception. So you could add parking spaces to an existing facility that was non-conforming without going through the variance process. In the past 2.5 years of streamlining, we've had 64 AE applications with 86 requests. So some of those applications had more than one AE request. The vast majority of those were what we call the 20% deviation rule. 60 of the 86 requests requested up to a 20% deviation. AE processing time well, let me step back. The 37 requests for between 10 and 20% deviation, prior to streamlining, that would have required a variance application and approval. Of those applications, the pre-streamlining variances, and actually now as well, variances are typically heard 3 to 4 months, in 3 to 4 months. So I submit a variance application and I am heard by the planning hearing officer in 3 to 4 months. AEs typically take 1 to 2 months to render a decision. So going from, say, I want to add on to my house and I need a 15% deviation from some code, instead of going through a variance, I go through an AE application, and it typically would save me 1 to 2 months of time. Aside from the 20% deviations, the next most popular AE is additions without providing parking. There's an AE category that allows up to 100 square feet of addition to most of these happen to be single-family houses without providing the code-required parking. There were 15 requests for that in the last
only 100
years.
square feet?
100 square feet max, yeah. Typically, I looked at one earlier today. Someone wanted to add a laundry room and half bath to their house. It was under 100 square feet, and they received approval of an AE to allow them to do that without upgrading their existing garage. So. And then just quickly, over the past 2.5 years, there's been a reduction in planning hearing officer hearings from 65 in the 2 years prior to streamlining to 40 meetings after the streamlining, and that could be attributed to, the increases in what's allowed for administrative exceptions, as well as pulling out the single-family conditional use permits and letting the design review board be the authority to those slope and grading issues. But there's been a pretty significant reduction in the number of planning hearing officer hearings. Then finally, parking exceptions. Parking exceptions grant exceptions to the number of parking spaces as well as the standards of parking spaces. In the streamlining ordinance, the central redevelopment area as well as the DSP were added to the areas in the city that allowed or that you had the ability to apply for parking exceptions.
There were others besides the downtown?
Correct. Parking exceptions are only available in the 2 redevelopment areas, San Fernando and Central, and in the DSP zone. So if you are not in one of those zones, you don't have the ability to apply for a parking exception. There are 4 findings, no public hearing. It's the decision is made by the community development director. Previously, the City Council had that authority that was given to the director in the streamlining process. Since streamlining, we've had 18 applications for parking exception. Parking exceptions typically take about 50 days to render a decision. And then as a parallel, if you are not in the San Fernando Road or Central Redevelopment areas or in DSP, just a commercial zone on Glen Oaks or on East Colorado, you would need to apply for a parking reduction permit. So they're sort of parallel applications. They can ask for the same thing. It just depends on the area that you are in the city. Parking reductions take about 75 days to render. Those also, the difference between those, aside from the area under which you can, depending on where you are, depending on where your business is, parking reductions are decided by the planning hearing officer. So it's similar to a conditional use permit. It's similar to a variance. I believe.
So up to this point,
that's it for me.
Up to this point, as Mr. Garpetian had noted, these are part of the streamline ordinance that you adopted, or you being the City Council, in 2013. This is an update. This is a status of the activity that we've experienced in those areas. That is for you. We're asking to note and file. The next part of this is some ideas that we have that we'd like your feedback before we reconvene any kind of task force or go out to the public. We'd like to know if there's something you just absolutely don't want to do, guys, don't go there. Or, yeah, that'd be something that you should bring up. So that's what these are. They're ideas. They're just that, and we're looking for your feedback. So on the AUP, you saw that the majority of the administrative use permits were for alcohol. One step that we could take is to process those like a Title V license. Right now, if you want dance or live entertainment, we have certain standards built into our code. If you meet those standards, the licensing section will issue a license for that. In the art and entertainment district downtown, we actually do a license. We have certain standards that any alcohol use has to meet. And for nightclubs and things, those include a contact information. So if something's going wrong, you have somebody you can contact. It's posted there in the establishment. Because there is very little comment and anybody interest in these kind of ministerial things, we would propose eliminating the noticing and rely on posting. And then we have all of this information on our website. So if somebody's really interested, they're driving by, they see the posted notice, I'm going to check on that. And you can see what it is. If there's a tentative letter, you can see what that is. You can make your comment, do it all online. So another area that we could is to eliminate the mailed noticing on that. On the next bullet, when we talk about eliminate mailed notices after initial approvals. This, a lot of times we get people that are operating either with a CUP or now an AUP, and they're operating like a champ. They never get a call for service. When that AUP or CUP expires, they've got to come back to us. They have to go through the whole process all over again. They have to pay a full fee, and we have to process that application. What we'd like to do is make this a little bit more similar to what we're calling minor administrative permits, so that those could be issued by staff. Typically, people would make application. It's a nominal fee. We route it around to police, generally police and neighborhood services, code enforcement. We haven't gotten a call for service on these guys for 5 years. Approved, and we can move it on. That takes a lot of burden off of staff to just redo something that was already fine, gives the applicant the chance to move forward very quickly, and we maintain a check and balance through police and code enforcement. There are some there are some other administrative use permits that we'd want to add, or some other uses that require a CUP that we'd want to add to the AUP process. On the ADR, we would like to make exemptions for maximum height of decks. So right now it's 8 feet. So if it was a deck, we would do it as an administrative design review. Maximum square footage of additions, right now we would, those are 100 square feet. Go ahead, Roger. Roger, you're going to clarify for me on that.
Actually, for exemptions, the maximum is 700 square feet.
So, that's right.
Yeah.
And 200 in the front. We would look to eliminate interior design and modifications. In our code, let's say, Mr. Najarian, you wanted to do some remodeling inside your house. Nobody can see it, but you want to do it inside your house. You actually have to come in and get a design review exemption to do that. And then we won't issue a building permit until you actually have that. So that is a process that staff does. It's pretty automatic because we don't see it. Design review is intended for the outside aesthetic. What we're suggesting here is we eliminate that from the exemption category and just say we don't do design review on inside improvements that can't be seen from the outside. And then I'm going to ask Roger again on the notwithstanding clause. There is a section. Roger, can you explain the notwithstanding? I have a general idea, but I want to make sure you get it right.
Yeah, basically that section says there are a number of things that we can exempt from the design review board, but if for whatever reason we don't feel like we should, we can take you to the design review board. So, as an example, I want to add 600 square feet to the back of my house. Technically, we can exempt you from the design review board because it's less than the 700 square feet. If, however, what I'm doing is, in staff's judgment, not appropriate to the rest of the house or the neighborhood, we can say, yes, we have the ability to exempt you from the design review process, but in this case we won't because of this, and this, whatever that is.
So the idea here being, if you want to take that discretion away from staff and just say, look, if you meet the standard, you can do it. That's what the modification would be there.
Right.
The decrease in radius and eliminate the mailing notice or eliminate mailing notice, that goes back to that technology that we talked about before that we didn't have in the past. Right now, every application is plotted on a map. So you can see every application that comes in. There's a report of new applications that anybody that wants can subscribe to, and we send that out. We would still notice by posting a project site. So once you see that big sign go up, you can go online anytime you want, find out what it is, comment on it. So again, it's a step further, and we'd like to know if that's something that you'd like us to explore. It comes down to those advances in technology that we talked about that we did not have in the past. Here again, Roger had talked about, and I think Councilman Friedman had asked, right now we can give an administrative exception for 100 square feet or less. Somebody's adding a half bath in a utility room in a 1920s home. They're doing it in the back. It's all very well done. That garage is from 1920 as well. You could say if you're adding square footage without an administrative exception, you have to expand that garage to current standards. Typically, people are coming in, we don't think that it triggers, 100 square feet triggers another car. So there's no parking. Typically, these are being approved once you walk through it. What we're suggesting here, the idea here is just make that by right. So if you're going to add 100 square feet or less, you don't have to tear down your garage and build a new one to the current standard. You can use the garage to meet your parking requirement that you have from the time it was built. The 456 rule is a rule whereby it has to do with setback. And what we'd want to do is eliminate this provision. So right now, if you have an older home that's set back 4 feet from the property side property line, which was legal at the time the house was built, and now you want to add to it, you've got to somehow make that setback 6 feet. What we're suggesting here is that we eliminate that provision and we either require compliance with the current setback for the new addition. Let's say I've got a single-family home in Spar Heights. I want to add a second and third floor. Design review says, yeah, it looks great. You need to set that addition back to the current code, which is 6 feet in R1, 10 feet in R1R. We could also amend the code so the increased setback is only applicable to the heights. So in other words, from 0 to 20 feet, 4-foot setback, 20 to 30 feet is a 5-foot setback, above 30 feet is a 6-foot setback. So let's take my same example in Spar Heights. My house is set 4 feet off the property line, and I want to add 2 more stories. That second story is going to be between 0 and 20 feet. I have to set back that second story 5 feet from the property line. And then the third story, I have to set it back 6 feet. So you're tearing away from your property line. So it's either make the whole addition, to the current underlying law, 6 feet, or let it tear back depending on how high you're doing that addition. This last one, and if you've read your letters, quite a bit of comment on and quite a bit of opposition, what the idea is behind Adams Hill and amending those. If you'll remember when we spoke at the South Glendale Community Plan, a lot of these lots, because it was subdivided before we came up with current standards, a lot of these lots are they're smaller than our minimum size lot. So anything anybody wants to do with that house, with their house, say they want to add 150 square feet in the back, or they're doing some other kind of modification, it actually needs a variance. So the idea behind this was work with the homeowners association, work with the neighborhood, and come up with its own unique zone so that we say you're able to do these things given the nature and character of your neighborhood, so that we're not doing everything by variance. Now, having said that, we've had, in the last 5 years, we've had 5 variances, one having to do with parking, some having to do with setback and adding additional room. And we've had 1 administrative exception that dealt with parking. But we did comment in the South Glendale plan, so we thought this would be an opportunity, if we wanted to work with the neighborhood and come up with a zone that's unique to that neighborhood. Now, I think you've seen several letters that say, no, don't change anything, we like the character. And indeed, if the council does not want to, we won't pursue that. We would continue to process each of these requests by a variance, and the person would have to make the findings and then have it granted or not. I do know of those 5, we were trying to check back. Of those 5, I know 1 was denied. Ultimately, it was denied. It went through several appeals, ultimately the city council, where it was denied. So those, I believe, this is the last one. Increase the 2,000 square foot rule. Downtown, we have this concept where if you're changing uses in less than 5,000 square feet, you don't have to provide more parking. You don't have to provide the parking for it. Let's say that you were a retail store and you now have done tenant improvements and you're a restaurant. You've gone from 4 per thousand to 10 per thousand. If you're in a 5,000 or less square feet, you don't have to provide that additional parking. There's parking throughout the downtown that can absorb that. That's something that we had in place and we've used a few times. With streamlining, we brought that that same concept outside of the downtown. So if you were changing uses in less than 2,000 square feet, you did not have to provide the additional parking. And that allowed buildings and uses to change pretty simply. Here, what we would ask for you is to increase that from 2,000 feet to 3,000 feet. At least allow us to go forward and look at it. The other portion of that is right now we have a maximum gross square foot area of 3,000 feet. So if you were in one unit and you wanted to take over the unit next door and expand, that was 3,000 feet, you'd wind up having more than 3,000 feet, you'd have to park it. So what we're asking is to eliminate that maximum. Really what it's going to boil down to are those opportunities where somebody has, let's say, a 3,000 square foot restaurant. A 3,000 square foot space opens immediately next door and they want to expand and now have a 6,000 square foot restaurant without providing more parking. And the idea behind it is if those were two separate restaurants, you wouldn't have to park it, the additional parking. So that's the idea behind that. And last is sign programs. Second, I keep saying the last. We've been here a while. Sign programs, they are required for new non-residential buildings with 2 or more tenants. What we've found over the years is that it's a little bit difficult for us, especially on smaller strip centers. I'm going in, and Shoe City was a famous one. They have a logo. It's a pink sign. It says Shoe City. And they have a logo. And we're hard-pressed to say, you have to change your logo to meet our standards for our sign program. We found it to be less of a controlling element and more of a headache for changing out tenancies. So what we're proposing is on those smaller properties that we would eliminate the sign program and we would treat each sign individually and we would review it. We have standards for them for signs and for the most part they work. We would keep them in the larger projects and the mixed use, the larger commercial developments. We would keep the requirement for a sign program. This is the last one that I wanted to talk about. And Madam Mayor, you had brought this up, I think, last week before. What we've seen is a spike in illegal building activity. People are asking for a certain permission that is granted, and then they're going beyond that and demolishing a building. We've seen this with a couple of historic structures. We've seen it in just other homes. I know, and from asking the staff, because again, I'm relatively new to this, have we seen a spike? And what I understand from certainly the longer tenured staff, it just kind of goes in waves. And it happens and then it goes away because there's a lot of notoriety that's brought around it. But the thing that we found is there really isn't a correlation between this and streamlining. It's because somebody is doing illegal activity. They know what their permission is, and whether it's granted by staff or a hearing officer or the design review board or the city council, they know what that authority is and they're exceeding it. And sometimes they do it purposely. Sometimes, it's just, I didn't know. We were just into it and we kept going. What we're proposing to this council and housing authority is that we become more rigorous and increase the penalties with that, combined with a real education program to say, don't go there because it's the death penalty. Right now, we have the discretion to double the fees for design review. So if somebody demolishes more than half their house, they now have to go to design review, whereas it might have been exempt before, or they did an administrative design review. Now they have to go through design review. We could double those fees. That exists, and what we would suggest is a more rigorous implementation of that. But beyond that, we would say that any work that goes beyond authority, and for your consideration, whether it's 50% or less, but if it goes beyond its authorization, that they automatically get to stop work until they go to the design review board. And the design review board weighs in on whatever design it is that they're now demolishing part of the building in excess of their authority. Last, and this is what I referred to, and Mr. Garpetian got a chuckle, with the death penalty, we would say that, let's say I've got a 1,000 square foot home, and I get a design exemption to put in 200 square feet in the back. And I go and I take down my whole house and I just leave the front facade. Well, we're going to give you a stop work order, and we're going to tell you to go to the design review, and for a period of 5 years, the largest your home can be is whatever it was. In my example, 1,000 square feet. So if I have a 1,000 square foot home, let's say that I'm being devious lands of fame, and I say, you know what, I'll get permission for 250 square feet. I'll have my guy come in and demo the whole building and say he just kept going, and then I'll build, 3,500 square feet. Or what we're going to say is, no, you go to the design review, tell them the project that you want to build, and it cannot exceed the square footage that existed before the illegal activity for a period of 5 years. That's a concept that we would like for you to weigh in on as a means to try and deter the activity that we're seeing in the last several months.
I think I'm sorry, Phil, just to be perfectly clear, though, and in the context of this being an update on all these matters, this is still really kind of an open question among staff. And the other side to that coin is, we should be very careful about using our processes, our due processes, as penalty. If you don't do it right, we're going to make you go through design review as though that, we're a penalty in and of itself. And so we want that balance. I think everything you would see through this is this notion of balance. We want you to do it right. If the community ultimately meets out some form of punishment by way of that moratorium, such as it were, in terms of what you can develop, that's certainly one thing. But again, we do caution. The other side of that coin is that we caution overtly utilizing existing processes, due processes, as punitive actions. So just full disclosure.
Just to be clear and clarify, if you take down more than half of your home, you're no longer eligible under our code. So we're not working the system. We're not using a process to beat you over the head. Our system does not allow your staff, our code does not allow your staff to issue an exemption or an administrative design review. So in that case, 50% or more, it needs to go back to the design review by code.
And just playing that right by the numbers. You can see this is still an open question for us, and that's the issue for us. But so we want the council to be aware, as Phil had noted at the beginning, this is a note and file. This is an update for you. At this point, he, being Phil, owes me a final report, if you will, on the streamlining. And that has to go from the CD director to the city manager. And we'll be reconvening the task force, understanding which task force members are still local, are still around, and then bring some of that information back to them and understanding what they would like to see, and indeed engaging probably even larger group of stakeholders than just that task force. But at this point, we're probably about a little over a year late for that particular report, and I think it has as much to do with just the transition in the department from Hassan to Phil, from Eric Krause to Tim Foy. No excuse, we do apologize for it, but we will get that back to you. What we want to know from council as we go forward, because again, this is a note and file item, is when we and as we reconvene the task force and other stakeholders, is there anything that you've seen here that is so objectionable that you would just as soon not have us waste time on it? No doubt many people are going to have many considered opinions on this material, and I think the theme that is woven through Phil's comments and from Roger as well is that we're trying to maximize the efficiency and the effective use of the limited staff resources as we have. And so if it adds value and it adds to the balance between my rights as a property owner and my neighbor's rights as the neighbor to that property, if it adds value and pushes the ball down that field, then that's something that I think we may want to consider as we move forward in this overall discussion. But for today, the question to you as policymakers, council and authority board, is: are there any items on here that you do not wish for us to consider as we reconvene this body and indeed reach out to still more stakeholders who will have something to say about all these different policies?
Okay, so I have a lot of cards, but I just want to ask Mr. Ochoa, did I hear you say that we are going to reconvene the task force and let them work on this and then go through a process?
We would certainly solicit information, feedback from them, but I don't know that we would necessarily be hamstrung into only talking to folks on that task force, because some of those folks are no longer here. People who would like to participate weren't necessarily part of that group, but I think it's a great place to start.
Okay. All right. Mr. Najarian, thank you.
Thank you. So, with regard to your question, what are we looking at? Thank you for the presentation. I think it has streamlined the process in terms of reducing the amount of time that both applicants and staff have to put forward. But I'm very concerned with this issue on Adams Hill. I'm not sure if there's a problem there or it's been a misconception on part of the community. And as the speakers come in, well, actually before the speakers speak, because the letters that I've gotten are all over the board. You're increasing development. You're promoting a lifestyle that's contrary to what we want. What's going on, and how did that? I mean, what are we talking about here? This is, from what I can see, it's a general discussion, a proposal, question as to what do we want to do. Do we want to treat Adams Hill with its narrow roads and its steep lots and its small setbacks any differently than we would College Hills, for instance? So I'm a little concerned that something has gotten out of control. I mean, I really feel that something is snowballed, obviously, by the looks and the number of folks in the room. They think we're gonna. I'm not sure what they think we're doing, but
I would.
Let's sort of deal with that immediately, because I think that's the big issue here.
I would submit to you.
But no applause necessary. Let's just.
No, fair enough. Certainly, I would submit to you. It's kind of analogous to what we saw with the South Glendale Community Plan meetings that you had in July, where it was information to edify the council as to how you felt, what direction you might provide as we go forth and engage folks. Similar kind of discussion. When we look at the specific issue of Adams Hill, one of the things, the beauty of having this process dovetail with the South Glendale community planning process, is understanding that when it comes to very unique areas, particularly hillside areas, the ROS, residential open space, R1R, the R1 restricted, that one size does not fit all. And the standards that are in place in Glen Oaks Canyon or Chevy Chase Canyon or Oakmont, or even College Hills, which is probably closer in terms of the development patterns, what you see in Adams Hill, probably suggests that Adams Hill, as a unique enclave unto itself, recognizing we have lots of homeowners and their property owners whose property is existing nonconforming perhaps today, it doesn't meet standards today, and among whom are folks who may call you, email you to say, I can't believe that I have to get a variance to moderately improve my own home. Why don't you? There should be a law. Something should be done about that. That is the idea behind creating a zone that is crafted and tailored to Adams Hill. The idea isn't to make it easier to develop any remnant lots in Adams Hill, because I think what you see here in the streamlining process is we're able to do that by way of the laws that are on the books today to make sure that it's sensitive. And if you're looking for proof of that, there were several properties last month that were rejected, I believe, at DRB in Adams Hill because it was determined by the DRB that they did not meet whatever the standard was that they applied. So the idea here, again, to be very clear, is just trying to help, and maybe we shouldn't help, and allow what is in place today to exist and not even touch it. But the idea there was to say, okay, if that's a very unique place, how do you help folks who are living with that uniqueness but yet want to still improve their property?
Okay. Councilmember Friedman?
I think Mr. Najarian hit the nail on the head because I think I was the one who asked for this to come back after having a conversation with Rondi Warner because we started this streamlining as it exists today about 2 years ago, and she pointed out absolutely correctly that we had never taken a look back and said, well, we changed the process pretty fundamentally 2 years ago, and what happened? Was it a good thing? Was it a bad thing? Let's take a look at the what's happened, the projects that are getting through, and say, did we go too far, and do we need to start sending stuff back to DRB again, or is there a way that we can tweak this? So this is really the time to do that. I was sort of surprised to start seeing so many emails because I didn't envision this meeting as being a time when we had some agenda beyond that. The agenda was really to take a retrospective look at the streamlining process and make sure it's working. We should always do that when we change a policy, and it's been a couple years now. So I want to thank staff for the review. I would have liked to see kind of more photos and examples so that we got a sense. Before I was on council, I was on the DRB for 5 years. So, my perspective is that I didn't always love the decisions the DRB made. Maybe I was curious to see whether I would have liked the decisions that the staff was making more or less. So I think that I certainly understand the concerns that people have because any time that you're taking up zoning, the fear is always it's going to be easier now to change my neighborhood radically. And I never saw this as being a review that was going to be different to Adams Hill than for any other part of the city because these ordinances affect all of Glendale equally. And then before the public comes up, I will just say that one thing that I remain interested in are finding a way for our existing homeowners, many of whom, very high percentage, over 50%, who now live in legally non-conforming homes because the zoning has been changed to where their home couldn't be built today as it had been. Adams Hill has a large number of those because you couldn't build those today because they're too close to the property line. And what happens is people discover, and I get complaints for this all the time, that if they want to do something that they think is really simple, like replace a deck or replace a staircase or fix a foundation in the case of a friend of mine, or even add a couple hundred square feet, they just can't do it because the home is legally non-conforming. So they're not trying to build a monster house or put a second floor on or do anything radical. They just want to even sometimes maintain what's there.
That's exactly
or to do a small, very small addition to a very small house, and they find out they can't because they would have to replace their whole garage to do it. Those are the kinds of things that I'm interested in finding a way to allow people to do that to today's living or even just to maintain their home, but in a way that doesn't then allow for monster house developments to come into our neighborhoods. So I still think that when I look at like that 100 square foot threshold, that's awfully small, 100 square feet. And I don't see anything here about those replacements of existing things like existing decks, existing staircases that might trigger those same ordinances or make people get a variance or say you have to build it exactly as it was even if you could do something better today. So that's something that I'm interested in, but want to hear the public.
Thank you. Let's hear from the public.
Guess we'll keep our comments until after the public
let's
speaks. Thank you.
Let's let them talk. Okay. Are we ready? Would this be 3 minutes? Is that okay with everyone? 3 minutes or less? 3 minutes or less. You can conclude your comments in less than 3 minutes. That would be appreciated because it's already 4:30. Okay, let's start with Julia Trice and then Sage.
Hello, and thanks for giving me the opportunity to speak. I suggest in the future when you have a proposal, if you aren't having it concern development, not to use the word development projects, because that definitely sounds like development, and there's no mention of old staircases or anything like that. I'm also one of your variances, and I was approved, and so I can go through the process. I've done it. Okay,
Can you give us your name, please?
Julia Trice. I have serious concerns about the proposal to create a special zone in Adams Hill to reduce the number and types of variances required for development projects. The proposal appears to have been written for the benefit of developers with minimal, if any, input from the community. It acknowledges the uniqueness of Adams Hill neighborhood with varying architectural styles. and then proposes to destroy this uniqueness by streamlining the process for obtaining variances and limiting notice to the community. This can only result in overdevelopment and an increase in new structures that are not in keeping with our neighborhood's unique flavor. Adams Hill has been specifically and unfairly targeted, primarily because it contains older homes of, and I quote, modest size with smaller lots, i.e., the people who live there are not as wealthy as the people who live in Glen Oaks Canyon, Chevy Chase Canyon, and the residential areas north of Mountain Street. I question the legality of specifically targeting a poorer neighborhood for development that is currently nonconforming and thus universally recognized by all of these neighborhoods as undesirable. The proposal claims that streamlining variances will result in a reduction of nonconforming structures. Of course it will. Whenever standards are lowered, it is easier to meet them. This is akin to addressing the crime rate by removing drug offenses and prostitution from the penal code. There will necessarily be fewer crimes because the conduct will no longer be criminal. But actual conditions will worsen because there will no longer be impediments to drug dealing and prostitution. I urge the City Council, none of whom live in South Glendale as I do, to give careful and honest consideration to how they would feel if these changes were proposed for their own neighborhoods. Thank you.
Thank you. Sage, followed by Winston James.
Just to be clear, we're proposing these for all of the city, right? I mean, everything that you've shown is for the whole city?
Well, the one question would be, would you like us to come back at a future date with the full vetting and public hearing with a special designation that takes into account all of that
uniqueness? Right, but everything else that you've shown is for the whole city.
For the rest of the
Correct.
city.
Hi, thanks very much. My name is Sage, and I've lived in Adams Hill for over 10 years. And the reason I'm here is because what I understood was they're revising the zoning standards for development. And that's exactly what it said, is a quote, revising the zoning standards in the area. Adams Hill is mentioned 4 times in this article, where all the other areas we're mentioning here are mentioned once. So I feel that they're specifically targeting this area. And like one of my neighbors already stated, the parking is already an issue. There's already plenty of development in this area. And to bring in more, to slice and dice the property is already there just for, I'm not really sure what reason other than financial, or just to bring more houses in, doesn't seem to make sense in this area. The place is, Glendale is the jewel city, and Adams Hill is a very historic hill, and it's a very beautiful place. To start digging in the hills and making existing structures come down because they don't conform, if that's a possibility, is, in my opinion, absurd, even if I didn't live there. I don't see where they can make all these changes and keep the beauty of this place intact. And yeah, thanks very much for hearing me. Thanks for what you do. I appreciate all your work.
Thank you. Winston James, followed by Myrna Stanley.
Hi, good afternoon. I'm glad to be here. And I'm, again, I'll read my remarks that I have addressed to you in a letter sent by email. I have been a resident of Adams Hill since 2005, and I share the Adams Hill Neighborhood Association Board's alarm at the recommendations preferred by the Community Development Department report on streamlining. I therefore do not wish to recapitulate the objections raised in the letter addressed to you by the president of Adams Hill Neighborhood Association, Randy Berner. There are, however, 2 recommendations in the CDC report that I find particularly unconvincing and objectionable. First, the report recommends that the city consider, quote, revising the zoning standards in this area, possibly by creating a new zone in Adams Hill. It goes on to say, quote, potential streamlining would result would result as there would be a reduction in the number of variances that would normally be required for a development project. That's on page 14. Now, in short, what the report is recommending is a lowering of permit standards unique to Adams Hill as a Glendale neighborhood, which will inevitably lead to an increase in the density of the population and housing structures in the area. Given the fact that Adams Hill's population density is more than twice that of Glendale as a whole, 13,163 people per square mile for Adams Hill and 6,396 for the rest for Glendale as a whole, and given its hilly terrain and narrow streets, one would hope that measures would be taken to decrease the growing pressure on this small area, not increase it. The logic of the report's argument is this: since Adams Hill is already very densely populated, let's make it even more so, while maintaining higher standards for other Glendale neighborhoods. I therefore urge the Council to reject this pernicious and prejudicial logic and recommendation, which in all probability is illegal. One remark that I'd like to make in relation to what was said, I'll just finish my remark very quickly. There's nothing in the report concerning Adams Hill that talk about existing residents wanting to make alterations on their homes. I'm absolutely surprised that this is being mentioned here when it's not mentioned in the report. What is mentioned in the report is change in variance, reduction of variance in order to allow development. That is what it says on page 14.
Thank you, Mr. James.
Okay, I have another thing on notice, but anyway, it's there, you got it in writing. I just think the city should do a better job of notifying residents of meetings. We were told about this on Friday, and the meeting is at 3 o'clock in the afternoon on a Tuesday, a work day.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Myrna Stanley, followed by Jerry Green.
Good afternoon, Madam Mayor, members of the Council on Housing Authority. I don't know where to start, but I'd like to preface my statements by telling you very bluntly that I felt I was sucker punched when I received an email Sunday evening, because I didn't receive the email that staff had sent out the Friday before because the email was incorrect. But to see that this very complicated matter, as you've heard from staff's presentation, was being put on as a note and file, number one. Number two, at a 3 o'clock meeting. Number three, before the Council on the Housing Authority, which I don't get at all. The task force, of which I was honored to be a member, put in so much time here at meetings at City Hall, and the homework we were given, binders, and to read and to come back with our suggestions and recommendations. And then the meetings before the Planning Commission and then before the City Council. This is not a note and file item, as you know, and it's ironic to me that the report presentation you just received is what should have been presented to the task force, because the city's ordinance, which the council passed, calls for a review of the change processes within 15 months of the effective date of the ordinance, and then it goes on. So we're asking for the council, of course, to follow its own the rules that they've passed, or they were in big trouble. But to tell you, you really need to have you really need to keep your stakeholders and your constituents in mind before doing something like this at a 3 o'clock meeting. This is just not enough time, and I think it's unfair. Thank you.
Jerry Green, followed by Jason Adams.
I've lived on Adams Hill since 1975, and until yesterday afternoon at 3 o'clock, I didn't know I was happy. I found out I'm not happy. I checked with my neighbor, he's happy. Across the street, they're happy. All around my neighborhood, they're happy, but this gentleman over here is telling me I'm not happy. We need to change things. It's not broken, leave it. There's some very smart people spoke before me. There's some very smart people that are going to speak after me. There's a lot of smart people that don't even know about this because it's 3 o'clock on a Tuesday and nobody found out about this in most part till yesterday. And that's not responsible government. We live there. I don't know if anybody else lives on Adams Hill. Anybody else live Adams Hill here? And you're going to make a decision on my welfare and the rest of the residents? I think that's wrong. And that's all I have to say.
Thank you. Thank you. Jason Adams, followed by Mary Lynn Fisher.
Hi, good afternoon. I'm Jason Adams. I live at 700 Alta Vista Drive on Adams Hill. I think the streamlining work you've done is absolutely fantastic. I own businesses in Los Angeles, and the CUP process is a nightmare. So I commend you on all the work you've done so far. I do feel, as far as Adams Hill is concerned, you're picking on us. And it seems like this is really overstepping the bounds. It seems like there are plenty of protections that are already in place, and that our only assurance as a neighborhood and neighbors are these variances to the code. That's when we are informed of a hearing and we can make our voices heard. And I think that if you're going to single out our neighborhood, we should have more control over what happens there. So the only assurance we have is through these variances. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Mary Lynn Fisher, followed by Kenneth Goldman.
Good afternoon. My name is Mary Lynn Fisher, and I've lived in the Glendale Annex section of La Crescenta for almost 33 years. So I'm not going to talk about Adams Hill, but you're not going to like what I have to say any more than you liked what the previous speakers had to say. I have objections to the Community Development Report on streamlining regarding further streamlining. I first learned about it from another member of the community and not from the city of Glendale. And I recently signed up for just about every email notification that the city offers. I've emailed the planning department staff members and I've emailed the city council voicing my interest and concerns about the issue, particularly of public notice for development. Why wasn't I on any list for circulation of this report? This report was circulated to a limited number of people on Thursday afternoon, and yet, as other people have mentioned, it's on the agenda for today's meeting. That doesn't look good. I've read the 18-page report, and it sounds like perhaps not everybody sitting in front of me has. And it was very hard to follow the report. One thing the report should have had was a chart pulling this all together so that I didn't have to keep flipping back and forth to figure out, now, does this proposed change relate to this and not this? Very hard to follow. My main objection is to the elimination of mailed notices to property owners within 500 feet of a property which a development or expansion is proposed for. For many projects, 500 feet is just too low as it is. Large commercial and multifamily residential projects have impacts far beyond 500 feet. This is especially true for any proposal that affects public space, such as a park. Notices should be mailed to all those within a reasonable radius. For a public park, for example, a reasonable radius would be half the distance to the next park. This expense can and should be borne by the developer. And the most effective way to alert the public is not by tech means. There are lots of people who either don't have the time or don't have the ability to use modern technology to follow everything the city is doing. The most effective way to alert the people to development is to erect poles and pennants showing the length and the breadth and the height of a proposed project. And again, this cost should and can be borne by the developer. In July, I sent a lengthy email to each member of the City Council explaining, is that my 3 minutes? Oh, okay. I'll send my email to other people.
Thank you. Kenneth Goldman, followed by Bill Weissman.
Good afternoon. My name is Ken Goldman. I've lived in the La Crescenta Annex for more than 3 decades. My primary concern on the streamlining has to do with notification to the public and reduction in the public's right to speak. The recent attempts to locate a cell tower and support structure within Dunsmore Park in our neighborhood at a location that would have eliminated one of the most used sections of that park, the generations-old sliding hill where kids would sit on cardboard and toboggan down the hill, demonstrated that the notification requirements for development already are inadequate. Streamlining as proposed will make a bad situation worse. In the department's summary planning department, it states that, this is on your website, quote, staff works with the Planning Commission, Redevelopment Agency, Design Review Board, and Historic Preservation Commission for public inclusion, I repeat, public inclusion in the planning process to ensure that general plan, community plan, zoning, and design guidelines reflect community character. Good governance comes from freedom of communication, public input. Thomas Jefferson noted that when a man assumes a public trust, he should consider himself public property, unquote. Public servants are supposed to protect the public weal. This cannot be accomplished by keeping the public in the dark. Absent the open door of full public notification and input, they can no longer do their job. Scheduling the streamlining proposal today at 3 o'clock on a workday on its face serves to restrict public debate. Closes the doors. Why the implied secrecy? Behind closed doors, invisible government fails to preserve the public for which it was established. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Bill Weissman, followed by Margaret Hammond.
Good afternoon, Mayor Devine, Housing Authority Chair Sinanian, City Council members, Housing Authority members, city staff, and the public. I think I got everybody in there. My name is Bill Weissman from beautiful far north Glendale, and I'm going to make some comments that are perhaps a little more higher level than what has been mentioned so far in regards to the specifics of the streamlining. And I'm going to repeat what City Manager Ochoa said about your role as policymakers, and I'm going to frame this as a policy question. And the policy question, as I see it, is what is it that is driving the streamlining effort? Well, my understanding is that it's staff workload, and the staff workload is becoming growing to too large an extent for existing staff to handle. And incidentally, that also seems to be one of the drivers regarding the other agenda item on today's agenda that's been postponed to a later meeting regarding the CEQA issues. And what occurs to me is that making changes in terms of streamlining that reduce public notification, that reduce the ability of the public to comment on projects, and that are primarily designed to alleviate the workload of a particular city department, I think we're going about this the wrong way. Streamlining and more streamlining is not the answer. The answer is to fully fund and fully staff our planning and community development departments so that they can appropriately handle the existing workload by qualified people, and we've lost a great number of qualified people in the last few years. That's the way you're going to solve this problem. not by making things easier for developers and worse for the community, but by fully funding and staffing your community development and planning department. And thank you for your time.
Thank you. Margaret Hammond, followed by Grant Michaels.
Good afternoon, Mayor, members of the City Council, and staff. My name is Margaret Hammond, and as you well know, you touched on a sore spot when messing with Adams Hill. I've lived there 60 years, and there's no way that I'm going to sit back and see anything happen in that area. I mean, it's a wonderful area to live in, although when I started standing up for it, it was considered South Glendale, and you could buy houses for half the cost of anywhere else in Glendale. Now, that's not the case. Our real estate has gone up in price. We have people in line waiting to buy or rent in our area. So that's one good thing about it. And we don't think we need anything done at all there. And it's already been spoken about, whatever, you know, in technical terms and so forth. Now, my other sore point is eliminating the mailed notices. No, you cannot do that. The people, therefore, that would be affected by anybody building or doing things that they shouldn't be doing or want to do, or whether they're legal or not, would not know that that was going to happen. Nonsense. Somebody said put it in the paper. What good is the newspaper? Maybe 2 days a week it's out, and I mean, a lot of people don't even get it anymore. I mean, why are you going to pay $22 a month to get 6 pieces of paper, and with not even a lot of the news of Glendale in it? I get it because I like to keep up with what's going on in the social world, so to speak. And I therefore feel that absolutely you cannot eliminate that 500-foot rule. It has to be maintained, and that people need to be notified when there's going to be something happening in their area affecting their homes and their lives. I mean, really, people just really get upset when everything starts, oh, the house coming down and this and that. It's really amazing. You know, I hear it from a lot of people. And so that's just my opinion on it. I think it's being well spoken about. Now, the one thing that I talk about the newspaper is that here is Glendale. The city of Glendale invites all residents to attend a community meeting Thursday, September 22nd. 2016 at 7 p.m. at the Pacific Center, the Sycamore Room, 501 South Pacific. People say, where's the Pacific Community Room? Well, of course, it's at the Edison School site. And nobody has heard about it. I just happen to see this because I do get the newspaper, and I'm saying it should be notified better than that, because I showed it to anybody I showed it to had not read it. And I was at a meeting last night, and I've talked to a lot at a meeting this morning at my assistant's week. None of them had heard anything or read anything about it anywhere. So I do think we need to have better communication when you're going to hold a meeting that's very important for all the members of Glendale, not just Adams Hill or South Glendale. Thank you.
Margaret. Grant Michaels, followed by Rondi Warner.
Good afternoon. My name is Grant Michaels. I'm the president of the Homeowners Coordinating Council and a member of the Streamlining Task Force. I want to continue to advocate for the task force to be brought back and to consider this as was presented in the plan approved by the task force and adopted by ordinance. The amount of time and effort that the task force put into these issues was considerable given the meetings and the amount of work. Given the attendance you see here and many people trying to, in a very short time, articulate their thoughts, this isn't quite the appropriate forum for that. The Homeowners Coordinating Council, those members who are still part of the task force, do want the task force reformed. I will speak to notice, as that is one of the major issues. Looking at the idea of the mailed notices, that was one issue that was discussed at the task force. Mr. Ochoa and I discussed that at length at one of the meetings, and the task force decided to maintain the 500-foot mailed notices. Part of that discussion was improvements to the website would make that not necessary. Looking at the city websites this morning, The DRB, which is scheduled for next week on the 22nd, the 10-day notice for that and those projects is yesterday. Looking at the agenda for the DRB, that has yet to be posted. Looking at the pending projects on the Community Development website, those are not posted. Looking at the mailed notices, they have gotten better. They now include a zip code where before they didn't, and you would have to look up a street address. Looking at the pending notices listed on the city website, they still do not note a zip code. If you are going to try and review those, you have to look up each address if the street name is unfamiliar. In conclusion, we would like to request that the task force be reformed, that the task force review the existing changes as well as any new proposed streamlining processes, and that a schedule be set for that. Thank you.
Rondi Werner, followed by Laura Guillory.
Hello, I'm Rondi Werner, president of the Adams Hill Neighborhood Association. And for the record, I was not notified of this report or the meeting, except for the fact that I was on the streamlining task force and was part of a group email that had gone out on Thursday. On behalf of Adams Hill, we respectfully request that the planning streamlining report be rejected on the basis that it is incomplete, inaccurate, misleading, and appears to circumvent the review process agreed to by the streamlining task force and seeks to undermine the South Glendale plan before it is even finalized. To characterize the streamlining outcome as a consensus or an improvement is a misrepresentation. Many members of the task force, myself included, were so alarmed by some of the proposals that the planning staff assured us that they would start with a trial period and then the process would be revisited in 15 months. Instead, 2.5 years later, the committee has yet to reconvene as promised. By recommending further streamlining and requesting that zoning protections be reduced in Adams Hill, the report appears to be an attempt to circumvent this trial period and the administrative design reviews made possible by the streamlining have resulted in the approval of many large-scale, impactful projects that were completely left out of the report, such as new multifamily developments of up to 6 units that replace single-family homes, residential additions and extensive remodels that in some cases more than doubled the size of the homes. And in one case, there was an entirely new home built on the same lot next to an existing home, all without public meetings and all in the name of saving time. To paraphrase from President Obama's Open Government Directive, transparency promotes accountability of its government, and public engagement enhances the government's effectiveness and improves the quality of its decisions. The citizens of Glendale are legally entitled to transparency. The eroding of public input has negatively impacted the quality of life for many residents. The secretive pro-development dealings of the past several years have impacted us all. It is time for it to stop. This covert governance calls into question who the city staff and leadership are truly representing, a handful of developers or the taxpayers at large. In conclusion, Adams Hill wants to work openly with the city leadership to develop planning policy that is fair for all residents, and the South Glendale Community Plan should not be put on hold a second time while the city staff seeks new ways to disenfranchise us from the planning process. Thank you.
Laura Guillory, followed by Kevin Wiley.
I'm tempted to ask for an immediate response to that because I'm very, let's say, disturbed by being called a covert government. But I'll wait for it. But Mr. Ochoa, I want you to
be ready.
Be ready.
Yes, sir.
And how did we get in this mess?
Yeah.
Really, how did we get in this mess? I'm really upset about this whole thing.
True.
But I'm sorry.
Let's let Laura.
Okay, my name is Laura Guillory, and I've been a resident of Adams Hill for more than 35 years. When I moved here, my son said, "We live in the best part of the worst part of Glendale." That was his assessment. Anyway, a couple of things that I had some questions. I'm new to trying to figure out how Glendale city government actually works and how you get anything done. So I sympathize with people want to remodel their homes, but also with neighborhood concerns. I did have a question, and perhaps that can be answered by providing an answer in the minutes, and that was on page 3 of actually the agenda. It lists all of those items that would be approved for AUPs. What was not clear to me was the sizes of any of those buildings, and I think that that would definitely impact that. Like you've got non-medical residential congregate care living. How big are those units that you're talking about? Are they for 10? Are they for 6? Are they for 20? That may have already been addressed, and if it is, just all I would ask is that we have a link to that on in the minutes, okay, regarding that topic, because I do think in this case size definitely matters. The other question that I had to do with, there was a mention of eliminating the need for a design review board of interior design on a house on the interior. And I certainly don't want anybody to tell me how I can rearrange my rooms, but one of the things that's happened in other cities is that people take rooms like a large family room and subdivide it maybe into 2 bedrooms and maybe add a bath. This then would also impact the parking. And so I don't want to look at being like Big Brother, where you're nosing around and looking at somebody's house, but by the same token, not sure how that issue could be addressed without infringing on a person's personal rights. But I do think that that's something that needs to be looked at. In New York, they're building 80 square foot rooms that people rent out with bathrooms, and I do see those population issues being affected here in Glendale, and the size of some of those units or studio units in downtown Glendale would probably equal like 2 parts of somebody's family room. So I think that should be looked at. The other thing is trying to figure out your website and trying to get answers to information. It really does require an advanced degree in navigating the archives. One of the things that in terms of notification, Glendale Water and Power, they send me a notice about my bill every month. They got my email address as a property owner because I've paid online, and they also tell me what my electrical usage is like, so they know what I'm doing. And my question is, if they have an email list that can apparently address all of those people that pay online, what would be the problem with using that as a way to be able to deliver information about the meetings? Just a suggestion. Okay.
Thank you, Laura. Thank you. Kevin Wiley, followed by Rick Barnes.
Good afternoon. My name is Kevin Wilby. I live up in La Crescenta. I guess they call it the Annex now, but they did. And Mr. Najarian, I have the answer to your question about the secret government. It has to do with notification, where if people don't know about it, then it seems secret. So, at any rate, I'm here not about Adams Hill. I'm here about cell towers. Specifically, as part of the retrospective on the streamlining process, what I've seen is something popped up that in all this list about what, whether it's in the house or you can't see it, or it's a change to the house, or it's modifying, requires variances or something, slipped in there is the wireless telecommunications facilities, which is sort of like an elephant in the group of Girl Scouts. They're talking about how to sell cookies, but this elephant's doing whatever it wants. And so what triggered this was a case in Dunsmore Park that was referred to by a couple other people, 3 other people, where AT&T was trying to usurp some land, a portion of the park, for a cell tower. Now, I happen to get the message on this because I live within 500 feet of that cell tower. I was one of a handful of people who did, because 500 feet described a park and a school, so there were about 3 people here and about 10 people here, and that was the notification. And so, thankfully, due to the efforts of various people, we got that canned. But what it shows is that you really need more notification. And the way AT&T was trying to do this, they were sort of fast-tracking it by, well, here's our design. And they didn't show everything on the design. They left out some important tall features. They mislabeled the trees so that instead of being protected species, they were species they could just get rid of. And so this was all supposed to go through. And this is the problem with the streamlining on this subject. I can see why, like my neighbor, it took 1.5 years to get an addition started because his house is like 2 feet from my property line. Well, you know, we're not going to move it. Just build it a little further over. Don't change things. That's a problem that gets everybody upset, except with the 500-foot notification, or as I understand it in the county, they require 1,000 feet. If you're going to have a Starbucks that is serving alcohol, then, you know, that's an area. Or you're going to, if I'm going to paint my house pink, that'll only affect you know, the people who have to see it. But something like taking parkland, especially by a company that's making money off of it, they should be able to foot the bill for a 5-mile radius and notify everybody by mail. I'm making this a run-on sentence so I can just finish my sentence, because I get my information from people walking their dogs in front of my house a lot quicker than I do checking my email. But I always look at the mail that comes in the mail. And so I would ask that you modify one small thing, and that is get that wireless telecommunication facility out of this process and into something where everybody knows about it.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Rick Barnes with the last card.
Good afternoon, Mayor, Council, Housing Development, Housing Department, and staff. I was on the task force. I enjoyed the task force. There was a lot of work. There was a lot of compromises, but the best part about it is that everything I'm hearing today was discussed in those kind of meetings. And I want to say one thing also is that I had 2 different notifications of this meeting. I don't read my emails every single day, but I did get the information. We as realtors did have a meeting and talked about it. We were trying to figure out what we were going to do, other than we were going to have a possibility of going back and taking a look at, again, having a task force for some of these ideas. To me, I think that's a great idea. It's been 2 years, 2.5 years. There are still problems with some of the streamlining, but at the same time, I think when we sit down and talk, instead of doing a committee meeting at a housing department, we do the task force. I mean, there's a lot of things that Bill said. There's a lot of things that Grant said that I'm in agreement with. There's things that I disagree with. But at the same time, what we were able to do is really talk about it. And there's things that really did help, because as a realtor and as a person that oversaw a lot of construction sites, there was so much time lost before, and now the streamlining has truly helped. And the other part is we really did have staff that was intelligent. I think we still have staff. I just did a development myself, and I did not let my contractors go. I walked through every single department, walked through and worked with people. And I got to tell you, I 21 times to get a building permit through. But the things that I saw was there was a problem in a 1959 remodel. And the builder in the building department actually saw it, and our plans showed it. But it was there, and he actually corrected it. But I appreciated having the staff that we have in the city of Glendale. And yes, we may be shorthanded. But again, I think if you go to another task force, I think it would be very, very good. Because again, you get people that are pro-builders, anti-building, not my neighborhood, in my neighborhood, and we get to find things that work. And yes, we cannot all be 100%, but the great part was that I saw the fact that there's things that we walked out shaking hands and making friendship and knowing how familiar we were with different items. And I know one thing is that Glendale is going to have, or right now has a need for over 20,000 more units. The state of California has needs for housing. We're going to double our population. If we don't start looking at what we're going to do, it is going to be real turmoil. So again, thank you for your time, and thank you for taking this up.
Thank you. Thank you very much. That concludes our card, so we'll take, I'll take discussion from council.
Madam Mayor, I'd like to give the city manager a chance to respond to the major points that were raised by our residents. Specifically, I think what we need to get some clarity on, I think residents would like this very much also, why is Adams Hill being targeted? And I don't mean that targeted in a negative sense. Why is it being picked out and singled out and treated differently than other neighborhoods? And what's the measurement by which there appears to be some kind of a need for Adams Hill to get this kind of attention?
Maybe by way of preference, if you'll indulge me, I'll go quickly. Just the R1R zone is intended for single-family development in hillside areas. Much of Glen Oaks Canyon, Chevy Chase Canyon, the residential areas north of Mountain Street, and Adams Hill are located in this zone. However, Adams Hill is unique among these areas of the city in that it was generally developed earlier and contains typically smaller lots. Many of the existing homes in Adams Hill have narrow interior setbacks and detached garages with little or no driveways because they were built to the front property line. With the architectural styles of the homes, while the architectural styles of the homes vary, many are revival styles and modest in size. Consideration should be given to revising the zoning standards in this area, possibly by creating a new zone which would acknowledge the uniqueness of Adams Hill area as long as this new design can maintain character. Potential streamlining would result as there would be a reduction in the number of variances that would normally be required for a development project. It would also result in a reduction of non-conforming structures. That's what was in the staff report. I understand that sometimes jargon can be complex. And if you see the word development and you take it out of context, it can make you think, oh my goodness, what are they trying to do? They're trying to make Adams Hill like downtown Glendale, when in fact you couldn't even if you wanted to. To the extent that we're talking about architectural styles, we're talking about character, we're talking about the very uniqueness that you heard reflected and echoed by all the folks in the audience, I think, shame on us for outthinking ourselves here that you could create what amounts to an overlay zone for Adams Hill for those folks, and I do appreciate Ms. Truss saying that variances are great because it allows this check and balance, and for Ms. Truss, maybe it is. But for somebody else who either doesn't have the time or the means, because although I don't live in Adams Hill, when I originally moved to town, tried to buy a house in Adams Hill for $750,000 and was outbid for that house. So the idea that Adams Hill is somehow the ghetto part of Glendale is just not accurate. To the extent that this is some area that's been left behind, no, it is an island of low density that has a ton of unique challenges. And what you hear it even from Ms. Werner from now and again, that we are Adams Hill and we are differently. So take stock of our difference and our uniqueness and make sure you note it. And then when we try to do just that, folks come back and say, hey, why are you treating us differently? I would submit to you that if you are afraid of development, because there's been a great deal of development, not just in Glendale, but all over Southern California, actually all across the country, that it's easy to be like a hammer and everything looks like a nail. What you have here is not picking on Adams Hill, it's finding a way and understanding that this is an entree. This is something, do you want us to go out and have a discussion with folks in Adams Hill about this kind of concept? That's all this is. And if the answer is no, boy, oh boy, then we wouldn't even waste our time. But I venture a guess, as you all have indicated, and certainly Ms. Friedman as regularly gets these types of phone calls, you will get the call from somebody to say, how come I have to get a variance for what I want to do to my house? I've been there for 20 years. We're trying to walk that balance.
While in theory, this idea of Adams Hill is special and it's old and the lots are smaller, therefore it calls for special treatment, a special approach. In theory, I understand it, but in practice, has that been an ongoing problem? I mean, have you had impediments as someone who has to deal with these issues because of its uniqueness?
I deal with the issues that you all bring to me because you are out there in the community. So when you hear from your constituents and forward it over, and we have to tell you, unfortunately, the process is the process, right. That's what we end up dealing with.
So is that a yes or a no?
It happens occasionally. It happens occasionally, and it depends on where your base of constituency kind of comes from. And very often we have to tell you, sorry, Adams Hill is that unique thing. They have to go get that variance or 2 or 5, whatever the case might be.
But I'm sorry, when you say it happens, I mean, it happens everywhere. It happens in every neighborhood. Is it happening more frequently in Adams Hill? Is there I mean, is there a visible, demonstrable need for Adams Hill to be treated specially? Again, that could be in positive terms, negative, or whatever.
Sure.
Take it as you would.
It happens in terms of the frequency and the volume less because there's less units there by way of by comparison to the rest of the city. If you were to go on a per capita, probably just as much as anywhere else.
But what we can't tell you is, you come to me and say, Phil, how come they can't add this? Well, there's a process. They got to get a variance. And you go back to that person and you say, sorry, you got to get a variance. Forget it. I won't do it. I don't know how many times that happens. But we know that the condition is unique. And if you wanted to make arrangements or a process for people to do that in Adams Hill, this would be a way to do that. Again, if we go out in the neighborhood and everybody says no, like the one gentleman said, the variance is a good check and balance. Okay, then we'll leave it that way too. But we get enough all over the city, and certainly you all hear from it. I can't do this in my house because I need a variance.
Okay.
Mr. Najari, sorry, Garpetian.
Okay. Are we making comments? Or
Yes.
I'm not done with mine.
Okay.
If that's
Did you
the
want
case.
to go
Sure.
continue?
Of course,
Okay.
Questions. I thought there was a follow-up question that
No.
you wanted to ask. Okay. In terms of the notice, I have to agree. There's a discrepancy between the types of technology that people use based on their age, based on their proficiency in use of computers. When it comes to notice, when it comes to keeping the process transparent and open, we should be going overboard. We should be trying our hardest to make it as transparent, as open as possible. So to say, well, we're going to eliminate mailing because internet's better, or because the newspaper is there, or you don't get the newspaper, you can see it online. I mean, then we're putting the onus on the residents for the notice. I think overkill. I think that's the concept that we should adopt when it comes to notices, because again, people are impacted by these issues. They want to know about it. They don't want to be surprised by it. They want to have their input on. If it's good, they won't have an input. If it's bad, they do want to have the opportunity to impact these. So I don't see why this council, the authority, certainly me, I would ever support anything that limits the amount of notice that people get on these issues, especially when it comes to development, construction, so on and so forth. And finally, some comments were made again about the impact of this report. This report just stands on its own. The council approving the report does not result in any decision one way or another, correct? Because one of the speakers said, well, this is erroneous, there are lies in there, misinformation, you should reject the report. I mean, I didn't really get the sense that you responded to that comment. I mean,
I don't know how to respond to that other than the information that you have before you is indeed factual. These are things that did happen. As a result of an action that was taken at the end of 13, and anticipating Mr. Najarian's question, yes, this report is more than a year late. When Hassan Haghani was getting ready to leave, this report was due in January, February of 15, as I recollect. We had been talking about it. I have my notes. And we were going to come back and ask you for the extension of this time frame, 6 months, 12 months, whatever it is, because as you look at the body of this material, there's not a whole lot of activity, and that was part of the frustration I think that the staff had felt, is that we did some of these actions and we didn't see a whole lot of savings. The individual applicants did in terms of efficiencies of time and a better process. And so the idea was, let's roll it for a year and we'll get more information that we can draw better insights from, and then we'll come back. As Ms. Friedman indicates, however, and as I mentioned previously, people in this room were saying, we need to have this come forward. And so, okay, guys, let's drop what you're doing. Let's get this update report to the council. It's been asked for. We have to reconvene the task force, such as it was, and if we're going to add anybody new to it. You know from your department strategic goals and your budget process the last 2 years, there was a phase 2 of department streamlining that we never got to because we couldn't close the door on phase 1 yet. It's strictly a function of the amount of work and the volume of work that's going through, and this is important. There's no two ways about it. But at this point, the idea is we're asking you, we're updating you as requested, and we're asking you before we go back to the committee, and we're going to have a discussion with them, or a task force, or whatever the term is there anything that we want to add while we're there? Try to make the extra pass to say, okay, let's increase the value of the time that we spend together. That's all this is. And to hear folks, say a number of rather nasty things even, to the extent that you have had open doors, that you have had open processes, you moved items from mornings to afternoons to nights to whatever the case is to get folks to be here, it's more than just a little bit misplaced. I mean, it's borderline irresponsible. So I would submit that to you. And again, what we're asking for, it's a receive and file report. You're going to tell us whatever feedback you want. Ultimately, it's going to go where it was going to go anyway, back to the task force.
Okay, and my last comment sort of piggybacks on what you were saying. I think what's happening here to a large extent is we have a report where it appears like the information that's going to be out there, that's connected, or the amount of notice that people are given that's connected to anything having to do with construction. I know when we say development, people immediately start thinking of ginormous buildings going up, but I want to give staff the benefit of the doubt that when they say development, they meant nail and hammer, going at it.
They don't mean maintenance and repair.
No comments, please, from the audience.
I think they actually did. But when you couple that with what appears to be, again, what can be construed to be an attempt to limit the amount of notice, and what appears to be one neighborhood somehow strangely being singled out or being treated as a special case, and also these meetings being scheduled in the afternoon, these types of meetings that do require community input, then you have a perfect storm. You have, it starts feeding suspicion, it starts feeding distrust towards the elected officials, towards staff, and we just need to, again, just work through this and make sure to explain everything away. I'll tell you, this report, you had as much time to familiarize yourself with this report as we did. So the whole concept of this somehow nefarious intent there, and we, somehow planning this behind your backs and springing this on you, I assure you, none of that happened. So,
Please, let's keep our comments.
Again, we received this report on Thursday, and here we are together having this hearing. And that's our job, and we're having this hearing. So we should try to, again, I think Mayor Devine has, I as housing chair have always made an extra effort to make sure that these types of hearings are, moved to the evening session so that people have an opportunity to comment. How many of the emails that we received included a line of the individual saying, I'll be unable to come to this hearing, but I wanted to voice my concerns. Of course, people work. People have real lives. They would like to be here, but they can't be here. And again, this whole thing feeds suspicion. So we need to make sure that people have as much information as possible, that this is passed through the sieve of public scrutiny, and only then move forward one way or another.
Totally agree. Mr. Garpetian.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. First of all, I'd like you all, thank you for all of you for being here today. The mailing, I don't think we have to get rid of the mailing, mail notices. My understanding is that the applicant or the developer provides the mailers with a radius map, and there are companies that certify the mailing notices, so there won't be an issue later, and the city mails them out. I mean, the cities that I worked with before, that's the way it was. I don't know, I think we are in the same process here, that there are companies that provide the mailing addresses and the labels, and all we have to do is mail the notices out. I know it takes time, but we need to do that. I'm not for eliminating the mailings at all. One thing I'd like to say is we're not upzoning, and we are not creating new lots. This has nothing to do with letting more development to coming or upzoning or changing the R1R zone to multi-residential zone. That's not the intention, and that's not before us. I also like to have for the next meeting a report as to how many applications were submitted for Adams Hills in last few years, to see why there is a need of any change and what was submitted that we need to make the changes that is proposed in here. As far as the R1R and R1 zoning goes, I think we went the other way around because most of the R1R zones, the density is much higher than the R1 zones, and they are 0.40, which is 40% of your lot, and most of the R1R zones in Adams Hills, they're very small, but yet you can build larger homes on it, versus the flat areas which are R1, and you can build smaller houses on the flat lots that are larger than the hillside homes. So I think that created a huge issue overall because the zoning was the other way around. The hillside home properties that have no flat area or very small pad, they build larger homes than the flat ones do. I think overall we need to, if you want to make any effective changes, we need to look at the hillside ordinance overall, because as you mentioned, one size doesn't fit all, and the topography and geography in Adams Hills is different than Northwest Glendale, and it's different than Chevy Chase, and it's different than Verdugo Woodland. So if you want to go to that route, I think we need to look at the entire city as a whole, because we have right now one blanket ordinance that covers the entire city. As far as the and what I want to mention is, again, that everything we talked about is in the zoning ordinance except the changes that's on page 7 that the gentleman indicated. I also agree that the wireless telecommunications, I don't think that should be in the streamlining process in the future if this goes through or when it comes back, as well as the alterations to existing hospital buildings, because most of the time they make very large changes to their buildings, and I think it has to come back to a review board, either it's design review board or city council. Now going to streamlining, I don't know what, I have my notes in a different order, I guess. We had 64 design review boards. Get to that right page. 128 applications. 39 of them went to design review boards, and we had about 64 board meetings, and yet it's like 1.4 applications per meeting, and it takes 4 months, sometimes 3.5 months, sometimes 5 months to get in front of design review board. And I don't call that streamlining, because for single-family homes or additions that are larger than 700 square feet, it still takes 4 to 5 months to get to design review board. I think the applications for alcohol, permits and everything else, it's fine. But most of the issues that we have that I hear about is when people want to get in front of design review boards, and it takes too long, and if you get a return for redesign, that's another 3 to 4 months, maybe 2.5 months, and it takes 8 to 12 months to get one addition approved. And I think that's the biggest complaint that I hear, and we need to work on that. And staffing, Mr. Wiseman indicated very wisely that we need to increase our staffing so we can process more applications in a timely manner. So I have to talk. Yeah, so I think we need to get a report. I'd like to know what are we trying to address in Adams Hills that is that important to change only the zoning in Adams Hills? Because if there are 4 or 5 applications and they wanted to add 100 square feet, and because of the size of the garage they couldn't, and they come and complain, it happens everywhere. You go to Northwest Glendale, if you're on a hillside, you're R1R zone, it's the same thing. You want to add to your house 200, 300 square feet, but because of your garage, you can't tear down your garage, and the space is not enough to build a 2-car garage, even if you wanted to. So the issue of the complaint about variances, it's all over the city. I think we need to look at it as a whole and not have a blanket ordinance.
Thank you. Mr. Najarian, anything?
I don't have a lot to say. I think any further modifications should go through the committee, get the band back together. But we have a disconnect here. I'm seeing a disconnect a three-way disconnect between staff, council, and the residents. And this entire hearing today has caused me much concern. This whole Adams Hill issue is not something that council has said we want to discuss Adams Hill. This was a sidebar comment, a subsection of a paragraph in the recommendations by staff. On its whole, I think very neutral, asking us if we wanted to deal with that. Was taken by the community as a call to redevelop, to change the redevelopment standards. And if you don't, you might be sitting out there saying, you don't know what hit you. I'm saying the same thing right now. What the heck happened today? This is not something that any one of us has a burning desire to put forth. I saw this as a rather neutral, vanilla discussion as to where we've gone, what has happened since our implementation of the streamlining, and then boom, this whole thing has blown up. And I'm not very happy about it. But anyway, I'm just going to say that it hasn't been a driving force on anyone on this council to change Adams Hill's redevelopment standards. If anything, it's a general sense of helping a community improve itself. And boy, did it get off, did this thing slip out of the pitcher's hand and end up in the stands and hit little Bobby in the mouth with this pitch. But I don't want, I'm just going to turn my mic off.
Thank you. Councilmember Friedman?
Yeah, I agree completely with Mr. Najarian. I sat here for this meeting wondering what is going on, because I want to just ask a few questions so I want to understand this, because I'm still a little confused. I had asked a while back, based on a conversation with Rondi Werner, to bring back this long overdue report so that we could do a retrospective and see what's happened in the last few years. So let me just ask two questions. First of all, is there anything that was suggested in the actual where the staff went through and has the kind of section where it said possible future streamlining that we could look at, or send back to the streamlining task force if we're interested in, changing the noticing and all of that? Is there anything in there at all that was unique only to Adams Hill as proposed?
Only that section amending Adams Hill R1R regulations. That's the only, everything else applies.
Everything else is citywide.
Correct.
Because that was my understanding too, and nobody ever gave any instructions for anything to be particular to any area of the city. No. So as I read this, someone said, would you like this in your neighborhood? But every single thing that was proposed is for the whole city, and everything that was done was for the whole city. So the only thing that I read as being different, and that's why I'm still confused, is that one section that says, do you want to take Adams Hill and do something different because it's unique? So there's that one kind of vague paragraph saying, hey, council, would you like us to talk about doing something different at Adams Hill? But all those specific suggestions are suggested for the whole city. People are still shaking their head. So am I wrong about that? Okay. So there may be, there's one paragraph that addresses Adams Hill that says, do you want to do something different at Adams Hill? That's it. But everything else, I just want us to all be on the same page. That's all. I'm not trying to argue. I want to be sure that I understand what was proposed. So all of that is for everything. And in fact, some of them are just for commercial zones, things talking about alcohol licenses and changes of use in industrial zones. Don't even apply to Adams Hill. All right. And then development, because I think that's the thing that's really freaking everyone out, is that the report talks a lot about development and new development. What does new development actually refer to in this report? Because now I don't think I know.
Sure. No, it depends. If you're talking,
well, what does it encompass? What could it be?
When you're talking about in that paragraph on Adams Hill, R1R required for a development project. Development is construction. That's building. You're actually going to do something on that property.
So does development include me taking a deck down and putting a new deck up?
Yes.
Okay. So it does include repairs and remodels if you're doing construction, as it's phrased in this report. I think what's really scaring everyone is when they see that, they think that that means that we're trying to open the door to new development in the traditional sense that we all think of it as bringing in the new houses and the new buildings. But we're talking about any sort of construction, including you repairing your home. So I want to be clear about that, because as I said in the beginning, my interest in it, the only streamlining I'm interested in is not about new buildings, new houses in your neighborhoods. I'm concerned about your ability as a homeowner to add 100 square feet, add a bathroom, replace a dry rotted deck, that kind of thing. So my direction for staff is, as we move forward, that's the kind of thing that I want to make sure that people are able to do. Not to do double the size of their house, to make it easier for that, but to make it easy for, we were talking about the 100 square foot additions in the rear, fixing up, the rear of your property. The things that when I was on the DRB, there were at least one project a week where the DRB members would look at the camera or look at ourselves and say, why are we here to review this? Why did we just put someone through? And Mr. Garpetti, I'm sure you had the same situations where you'd say, why did someone just have to wait 5 months to come here for us to approve putting our deck on the rear where no one's ever going to see it? And that's what the original streamlining was supposed to take into account. What I'm curious, what I wanted to know from this report is, have we gone beyond that, and are we now allowing, Ms. Warner brought up 6-unit buildings to go through with only administrative review. That's a concern to me if that's happening. And what I don't see in this report is I don't see mentions of those kinds of things. So are we missing a big chunk of development that once would have had a public hearing that are those kind of big D new projects that people are concerned about that we're not seeing reflected in this report?
I'm going to give Roger and Eric a chance to think about it. But yes, in 2013, the council said 6 units or less is small enough. It's not wild development run amok. It's small enough that we can do an administrative design review. And in administrative design review, be very clear, we get the same submittal that you would do for a DRB. But we look at it and say, and staff does, much like they would with anything going to the DRB, they work with the developer, go back and forth, and make sure that it's compatible.
So what I would like to see, before I can feel like I can vote for this, even as a note and file, I would like to see those projects. Because I'd like to feel reassured that they are compatible and that they wouldn't have been different or better if they had gone through the DRB. Because that was the promise, that when the staff reviews it, you'll end up with essentially something that's as compatible or as high quality as if it had gone through the DRB.
Let me take this opportunity also to make sure that everybody's aware. When we do that, we then post a decision letter, and we ask for public comment. Give the same amount of time you would have to go to a hearing. You can make that comment by mail, email it into us, and then all of those are responded to in the decision letter. So it's not that we've cut out community participation, but it's something that the council felt these are small enough, the staff can look at it like they do a DRB, and they can render a decision. And we're not going to take out the comment. Go ahead and comment on it. We'll take that into account. And then we've said that a decision comes in 10 days.
Okay, so it still has a process. So I think what I would, so my direction then, I've asked my questions. My direction is I would like us to take this forward to reconvene whatever group of people. It doesn't have to be the same exact band. We could have new members in the band. Go back and let's have them look at those projects and take some time and really see if we have to revise it. If those are getting through too quickly without enough comment, if they don't look compatible, let's have the group make some recommendations and to look at your other recommendations. I'm not interested in stopping the mailing, the 500-foot. I'm not interested in exempting telecommunications, large hospitals, or large projects. And I actually agree that with telecommunications, we might want to actually widen that and have those companies pay for it, because it sounds like people are not finding out about that. I'm interested in that sort of nuclear option with people that go way beyond the scope of their approvals. I've seen this play out, particularly with historic resources. I'm very concerned about people doing this to historic properties where they're told you cannot develop, or you can just do the roof, and the next thing you know, the whole building's come down. And we have a case of that right now in the city. Other cities have, with their historic resources, scorched earth policies. Whereas if you knowingly, if you destroy a historic resource when you were sort of told not to, you can't develop again, period. Or if you have 10 years or something. So I'd like to look at some real disincentives for that. And just a few more that I pulled out of here, just a couple. And again, this is no decisions being made on anything today. This is to go back to the community to look at and to at some point to come back to us. With the AUP for alcohol, the fact that we've only had one of these be controversial, I'm willing to look at a way of reducing some of the mailing to that, but not if it's affecting residential neighborhoods or in areas where it's looking like it's going to be controversial, like Starbucks. The AE elimination of the 100 square feet without parking, I'm okay with that. And I think that 100 square feet is so arbitrary when you look at particularly the older, smaller houses, telling people you can never put another bathroom on your one-bathroom house because you have to do a new parking lot, to me has always been ridiculous, and I really would like to look at that. I appreciate the concern about people subdividing and moving other folks in. I think we have ordinances to deal with that. I'm thinking really of people that are in small houses that want to just kind of bring them up to today. I've seen this a lot with people. I get a lot of complaints about this from folks, and they're told you have to have a 2-car garage, 3-car garage, that sort of thing. The setback thing, to go with the prevailing development codes, I absolutely think that we should do, and make sure that we're keeping within the codes. And I would rather have things about whether second floors get pushed back or not stay with DRB, because I think it really depends on the particular design of the house and the neighborhood. So those are sort of my directions, but I think that this is the beginning of a long process, and everyone will have a chance to weigh in, and I appreciate the concerns. Believe me, I don't think any of us want to pick on Adams Hill. I think we're trying to actually make it easier for you to retain your identity, as it were, through this. That would be my goal. Being a special neighborhood and one that has particular development challenges with new projects coming in and infill on small lots, I think should be a concern, because you've got some infill proposals right now, and I know it is scary, and I don't want to do anything that's going to make it easier for people to do that kind of infill that's incompatible with the area. So that wouldn't be my goal at all. Thanks.
Okay. Mr. Kelly, would you like to weigh in, or Ms. Parazian?
I really have no comment today.
Okay, thank you.
And I'm going to talk about for myself, since it is a new issue, this streamlining issue for us as a housing authority member. So a lot was said, and I don't have to add much. It was really hard for me to digest it and make a comment at this point, okay? Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
I just
yes.
mention one more thing.
Mr. Garpetti.
I just want to mention that everything in our report up to page 7 is already in our ordinance. So if you have an issue with that or the streamlining process that was approved in 2013, when we are reviewing the new process or new ideas, we can maybe address some of these. But everything up to page 7, it's in our ordinance already. So these are not new. It says further streamlining discussions. That's what the ideas are that is going to be talked about in the future. And also there are some examples of the projects that use the streamlining process, and it's 2920 Greenwich Road, 830 Harrington Road, 2566 East Chevy Chase, Valley View, 1680 Valley View, Edgewick, Wonderview, Marion Drive, which is in Adams Hills, and there are 9 projects that's indicated in there. So just FYI.
Okay, thank you. Because of the time constraints, I will keep my comments short. I'm going to look at this as the big picture. We had 4 days to look at this and to come up with input. We were under a time constraint as well. I felt it was little time to digest as well, to come to any sort of decisions. My first take on this, and I hope this doesn't sound harsh, but it felt as if the whole thing was about saving staff time, and my question was, at what cost? And that's important to me. So I think we have staff's perception, and I thank you so much for this report. It was very comprehensive, but I think it's very, very important that we have the residents' input, because we are the ones who will be impacted by this streamlining. So my recommendation is, and I've heard several of my colleagues kind of allude to this, is to revisit or reconvene that original go back to the original process that was implemented, where there was a task force that worked on the ordinance and brought their considerations and their ideas to the Planning Commission. So I'd like to see the task force do two things. Number one, also review the impact that the streamlining has had in the last few years. We have staff's report. We know where they stand. I'd like to hear what the task force. And also, as Mr. Ochoa says, add, if we don't have the same members, that's okay. We can get homeowners association members. We can get real estate agents, everyone involved that wants to be involved to get your input. And Adams Hill, of course, you're more than invited and welcome to be there. So we would get the task force put together, give a review of what has happened in the last few years, and then make recommendations, go through the streamlining suggestions, do your report, take it to the Planning Commission. You will have a hearing there. This way you will get 3 bites out of the apple. You will have a public hearing on the task force. You will be heard at the Planning Commission. Planning Commission can decide what they feel is the best way of streamlining, what works for all of us, you, this council. Bring that report to council. Again, we will have a public hearing. You can voice your opinions, and we will go from there. So with that, I think that if we follow the original protocol, we can get the best streamlining process and protocol that we possibly can. I think this will allow for transparency, and I think it will be the best way of implementing this process. So I hope that some of my colleagues will agree with me, and I also agree totally with Mr. Sanatnian that this should be held at the 6 o'clock council meetings the next time it comes back to us. Thank you.
Question from staff.
Mr. Garpetta.
The ordinance that was passed in 2013, or the changes to the ordinance, the streamlining items that was in the ordinance, was it reviewed by the task force or not?
That ordinance came to you by way of that task force, and the ordinance actually says, rather interestingly, that the community development director will provide a report to me, not to you, but to me, after the director consults with stakeholders, including the task force. It just seems a little weird, and I think because it was not going to ultimately be a document that came to council by way of the ordinance, it was one of those things that as we transitioned at the director and at the division manager level, it just got pushed back to this point in time. We're working on the South Glendale plan. That's the priority right now. So it would have come to me as the final capstone of that process, so then we could begin this process. Because it was requested that we get an update, here's your update. And I think we have input from council, certainly from the community, as we go forward. And we will pick up where we left off in terms of bringing that task force together. The membership will figure out as we go. And then ultimately it will come back to you for that final evaluation, either just tweaking what we have on the books today or increasing the scope of what we do. But that'll be your call in an evening meeting.
Yeah, but again, the 2013 ordinance was part of the task force, was involved in that ordinance.
Yes.
I just want to make sure of that.
So there was consensus until the very last moment, and then part of it broke apart. But it was enough for the council to still approve the overall ordinance.
But my point is, Mr. Garpetta, if I may, is the fact that that task force was supposed to be reconvened to review the impacts of the streamlining, and it never happened. And so I would like to have them do that review. We have staff's report. We know what the numbers are, but I'd like to know what, Councilmember Friedman is talking about pictures of what went on during the 2 years. And I think that's something that the task force could look at and review, and then see if there could be tweaking that needs to be done on the current streamlining, and then move forward to the new, the more current streamlining that we're proposing. And that way we get all of the community comments, we get, and Planning Commission can take a look at it, bring it back to us, and then we can make a final decision. So I would like to see that sort of protocol, which was, I guess, outlined in the previous ordinance,
That
or
is
the
where
current ordinance.
we're headed, yes.
Yeah, and then I think that would be easier and more transparent. Everybody would have a voice, and then we could decide on the direction that we're going.
Just two questions. So in that case, are we still to vote? I mean, what are we voting on exactly? First of all, and then my second question is, I also just want to make sure that I really want the group to look at, like I said before, repairs to non-conforming properties, because that's been a real issue. So
I know
not just repairs. You know what I'm talking about. The types of situations I'm talking about.
And I think you find that more in older subdivisions where standards have changed and developed before the standards existed. So absolutely, we will go that route.
So I guess I.
Oh, and I'm sorry. To the specific. What are we voting on? Your observations as our policymakers don't count less because you're not on a task force. Right? Mm-hmm. You saw this after that task force saw it, and then a council, different council than this council, let alone the Housing Authority Board, looked at it and approved it. So as we're going back to that task force, let's bring it to the council, because it isn't something that you should be kept in the dark in.
I mean, what are we voting on right now?
To receive and file the report, and
to note and file. And you've provided direction on your perception of the matter so far.
It doesn't mean that we necessarily
no,
approve any conclusions.
You're not doing anything.
So that's why I'm asking if I might wrap this up, because it's 5:45. What I'm suggesting then is, if we will note and file this with the intent that the task force should be reconvened and more members added that are interested in the streamlining, that they can review the current ordinance, thank you, the current ordinance, and then look at the streamlining to come for that we're looking at today. And then this can go to Planning Commission, where it will be heard again. Their recommendations will be heard, just like happened the last time. And then eventually Planning Commission will bring it to council, and we can just discuss and decide what their recommendations are.
I think you need to bring it back to council one more time before you go to commission, because we don't have an initiation yet. This was such an early step in the process, just to give you an update before Phil and his team went back to the stakeholders. So at that point, at the point that council says, after it's heard from the task force, it wants to make any changes whatsoever,
right,
then council would initiate that, and then it could go to Planning Commission.
Righto. So we can give staff a direction that the task force be reconvened, members added, review, and then proceed.
The only thing I would suggest is that Phil and Mr. Choi have the authority to reconvene that not be the direction of the council, because it might trigger the Brown Act for the task force. So that's already part of their charge. They're already going to do that. So I would suggest that the only direction be that you direct staff to, or note and file the report, and then they can do what they recommended they would do, which is take it back to the stakeholders.
I'll move that.
Second.
Roll call, please.
I'm sorry. It needs a second. It needs a second from the council member. Sorry.
Oh, second from council.
So moved.
And do we need to?
No, just council.
Roll call, please.
Council members: Friedman.
Yes.
Garpetian.
Yes.
Najarian.
Yes.
Sinanian.
Yes.
Mayor Devine.
Yes.
Same for housing.
And housing? Do we need roll call for housing? We don't.
You don't.
Okay. Thank you. Okay. Thank you very much.
There is one more item.
Would you like to just go to closed session and we can push that item back?
Yes, I think we should.
Measure M item.
Yes.
Mayor and Chair, can we have
going to be a long
motions?
meeting.
Can we have
Move to
motions?
adjourn for council.
Thank you.
Good
Second.
stuff.
Motion to adjourn Housing
Not so
Authority.
much with M necessarily.